The cold January air swept across Washington, D.C. as crowds gathered for the presidential inauguration. The sky was clear blue, a perfect backdrop for this historic moment as Donald Trump prepared to begin his second term as President of the United States. People from all walks of life had come to witness this event, some traveling hundreds of miles despite the bitter winter chill. The inauguration platform stood majestically in front of the Capitol building, decorated with red, white, and blue bunting. Secret Service agents scanned the crowds, their earpieces occasionally crackling with updates. Nearby, a group of journalists checked their cameras and notepads, ready to document every moment of this historic day. Among the spectators was Tom Wilson, a retired history teacher who had attended every inauguration since 1976. "There's always something special about these ceremonies," he told the young couple standing next to him. "You never know what might happen." Little did he know how prophetic those words would prove to be. As the ceremony began, the usual formalities unfolded. The Supreme Court Chief Justice stood ready to administer the oath of office. Former presidents and dignitaries sat in their designated places, bundled against the January cold. The First Lady, elegant in a tailored blue coat, smiled proudly as her husband approached the podium. President Trump stood tall at the microphone, his distinctive hair barely moving in the gentle breeze. His voice rang out across the National Mall as he began his inaugural address. "Today we come together as one nation to chart a new course," he declared, his words carrying across the hushed crowd. It was precisely 12 minutes into his speech when something extraordinary happened. A flash of movement caught the attention of several people in the front rows. At first they thought it might be a piece of paper caught in the wind. But then gasps rippled through the crowd as they realized what it was. A large blackbird was circling overhead. Birds weren't uncommon in D.C., of course. Pigeons often fluttered around monuments, and occasionally eagles could be spotted near the Potomac. But this was different. This was a crow, larger than most, with feathers that gleamed blue-black in the winter sunlight. And it was flying with purpose. Secret Service agents tensed, hands moving instinctively toward their weapons. In today's world, anything unexpected was treated as a potential threat. Several agents spoke urgently into their wrist microphones, eyes tracking the bird's movements. President Trump, unaware of the commotion, continued his speech. "We will rebuild our infrastructure and restore our standing in the world," he was saying when the crow made its move. With 3 graceful circles above the inaugural platform, the bird descended. People held their breath. Cameras that had been focused on the president now followed this unexpected intruder. Then, in a moment that would soon be replayed on news channels worldwide, the crow gently landed on Donald Trump's right shoulder. Time seemed to freeze. Secret Service agents were momentarily paralyzed by the sheer unexpectedness of the situation. The First Lady's eyes widened in surprise. In the crowd, thousands of phones were raised to capture this unbelievable moment. The president himself felt the weight on his shoulder and paused mid-sentence. He turned slightly, coming face to face with the crow. For a heartbeat, man and bird looked directly at each other. Those closest to the podium would later swear they saw something pass between them, a moment of recognition, impossible as that seemed. What happened next would become the subject of endless discussion. Instead of panicking or swatting at the bird, President Trump simply smiled. He glanced at the crow and then turned back to the microphone. "Well," he said, his voice steady, "looks like I've got a new friend." The crowd's tension broke into nervous laughter, which quickly turned to applause. The president, never one to miss an opportunity, added, "I've always said we need to protect American wildlife." This drew even more cheers. All the while, the crow remained perched on his shoulder, as comfortable as if it belonged there. Its feathers were sleek and shiny, its eyes bright with an intelligence that seemed almost human. Unlike most wild birds, it showed no fear of the man or the crowd. Wildlife experts watching from home were baffled. Crows were known to be intelligent birds, capable of recognizing human faces and even using tools. But this behavior, deliberately landing on a specific person during a major public event, was unprecedented. Carol Zhang, a veteran camera operator for a major news network, kept her lens trained on the unusual pair. "I've filmed 6 inaugurations," she whispered to her colleague, "but I've never seen anything like this. That bird looks like it's listening to the speech." Indeed, the crow seemed almost attentive, occasionally tilting its head as the president continued his address. The speech, which had been about unity and rebuilding, now took on an almost mythical quality with this unexpected addition. Social media exploded within minutes. Inauguration crow began trending worldwide. Political commentators struggled to find historical precedents. Some compared it to ancient Rome, where augurs would read the flights of birds to determine whether the gods favored a new leader. "It's like something out of Game of Thrones," one pundit remarked, referencing the popular television series where crows often carried important messages. The president continued his speech for another 20 minutes, never once attempting to shoo the bird away. The crow, for its part, remained perfectly still except for occasional movements of its head, as if surveying the crowd. White House staffers watched in a mixture of amazement and concern. This was definitely not in the carefully planned schedule for the day. The president's speechwriter, who had labored for weeks over every word of the inaugural address, couldn't help but feel that his work had been completely overshadowed by an unexpected bird. In the crowd, different reactions played out. Some saw it as a powerful omen, while others dismissed it as a curious coincidence.
One elderly woman clutched her grandson's hand and whispered, "Remember this day, child."
You're watching history. Wildlife experts who were called by news outlets to comment live were cautious in their assessments. Crows are remarkably intelligent birds, Dr. Alan Peterson, an ornithologist from Cornell University, explained to viewers. They can recognize individual human faces and remember them for years. But this behavior is highly unusual. This crow seems to have deliberately sought out the president. As Trump neared the end of his speech, the crowd waited to see what would happen next. Would the bird fly away? Would it have to be removed? The Secret Service had quietly prepared a contingency plan, but they hoped they wouldn't need to intervene. Any attempt to remove the bird might create an even bigger spectacle. The president reached his closing remarks. "God bless America," he said, his voice strong despite the unusual circumstances. As if on cue, just as he finished speaking, the crow spread its wings. In one fluid motion, it launched itself from his shoulder and soared upward into the blue sky. The crowd gasped collectively, then burst into applause, though whether they were applauding the speech or the bird's perfect timing was unclear. Camera operators tracked the crow as it circled once more over the inaugural platform, then flew off in the direction of the Washington Monument. President Trump, ever the showman, raised his hand in a wave, as if bidding farewell to the bird. This gesture earned him another round of applause. Even those who had not supported him politically had to admit it was a remarkable moment, handled with unexpected grace. As the ceremony concluded and the new administration made its way back inside the Capitol building, the questions began. Where had this unusual crow come from? Why had it chosen this moment, this person? Was it just a wild bird acting on inscrutable bird impulses, or was there something more to it? The presidential limousine pulled away from the Capitol, carrying Trump and his family to the traditional parade route. Inside the vehicle, away from the public eye, the president turned to his chief of staff. "Well," he said with a hint of amusement. That wasn't in the briefing. His chief of staff, still looking slightly shell-shocked, could only shake his head. "No, sir, it certainly wasn't. Should we have someone look into it?" The president considered this for a moment, then shrugged. "Let's see what happens. Something tells me we haven't seen the last of our feathered friend." As the presidential motorcade made its way down Pennsylvania Avenue, people lining the streets were talking less about policy promises and more about the crow that had stolen the show. Smartphones displayed the image that was already going viral. The President of the United States with a majestic crow perched on his shoulder, both of them seeming perfectly at ease with the arrangement. At the National Zoo, the head of avian research was already fielding calls from journalists seeking expert opinions. "American crows are common in this region," she explained patiently. "But this behavior is anything but common. We're as fascinated as everyone else." By evening, as inaugural balls got underway, the crow incident had become the talk of Washington. Comedians were having a field day. Political analysts were offering increasingly elaborate interpretations. And somewhere in the city, an unusual crow had returned to wherever it called home, unaware that it had just created one of the most memorable moments in inaugural history. What no one knew then was that this was just the beginning. The crow that the public would soon nickname Liberty would return, And the story that began on Inauguration Day would grow stranger and more wonderful with each passing week. But for now, as darkness fell over the Capitol, all that remained were questions, theories, and the sense that something truly extraordinary had just occurred, a moment when the natural world had reached out to touch the world of human affairs, leaving everyone who witnessed it with a story they would tell for the rest of their lives. The morning after the inauguration, Americans woke to a nation captivated by an unexpected story. Breakfast television shows, normally focused on policy discussions and cabinet appointments, instead led with the Crow incident. Good Morning America opened with the now iconic image of President Trump at the podium, the sleek black bird perched calmly on his shoulder. "It's the moment everyone's talking about," the host announced, before playing the clip that had already been viewed over 50 million times online. A wild crow lands on the president during his inaugural address. And what happens next is remarkable. In living rooms across America, families gathered around television sets, many watching the footage for the first time. "Look how still it sits," observed a father in Ohio, pointing to the screen. "That's not normal bird behavior." His teenage daughter, scrolling through her phone, added, "It's all over TikTok. People are calling it the presidential crow and making all kinds of videos about it." Indeed, social media had exploded overnight. The hashtags Inauguration Crow and Presidential Bird were trending globally. Memes multiplied faster than anyone could track them. Some photoshopped the crow into famous historical images. Others added humorous captions to screenshots of the president and his unexpected feathered companion. At a diner in rural Pennsylvania, the morning regulars debated over coffee and pancakes. "My grandfather used to say crows are messengers," an elderly woman said. "In the old stories, they bring warnings or important news." "Or it could just be a bird that got confused," countered the pragmatic owner, refilling coffee cups. "Animals do strange things sometimes." This same conversation was playing out in countless variations across the country, reflecting America's diverse perspectives. For some, the incident was merely an amusing coincidence. For others, it carried deeper significance. Professional ornithologists found themselves suddenly in high demand for interviews. Dr. Eleanor Reynolds, a leading expert on corvid behavior from the University of Washington, appeared on 3 morning shows. "American crows are indeed highly intelligent birds," she explained on CNN. "They have complex social structures and can recognize individual human faces. What makes this incident so extraordinary is not just that a wild crow approached a human, but that it chose such a specific moment and showed no fear of the crowds or noise." When asked if the bird might have been trained, Dr. Reynolds shook her head. "The behavior we observed doesn't match that of a trained bird. This crow moved with purpose, but also with what appears to be independent decision-making. It's genuinely puzzling from a scientific standpoint." Meanwhile, at the White House, staff were dealing with an unprecedented situation. The morning briefing included a topic that had never before appeared on a presidential agenda: the crow. "Sir, we've been inundated with press inquiries about yesterday's incident," the communications director explained, choosing her words carefully. "How would you like us to respond?" President Trump, known for his ability to seize unexpected moments, seemed almost amused. "Tell them the truth. A crow landed on my shoulder during the most important speech of my presidency, and instead of panicking, we had a moment. Americans like animals. Let's see where this goes." By mid-morning, the White House had released an official statement that was notably lighthearted. The president was honored by the presence of what appears to be a Native American crow during yesterday's inauguration. While unexpected, the moment highlighted the importance of American wildlife and natural heritage, which this administration values deeply. Wildlife conservation groups, normally at odds with many administration policies, found themselves in the unusual position of praising the president's calm response to the bird. "Whatever your political stance, we can all appreciate a moment of harmony between humans and wildlife," the National Audubon Society posted. "The president's composure was commendable and may help inspire more Americans to appreciate our native bird species." By noon, the bird had been unofficially named Liberty by internet consensus, a name that quickly caught on with the press. The Washington Post ran the headline, "Liberty and Justice for All, the Crow That Captivated a Nation." Meanwhile, a more practical search was underway. Where had this unusual crow gone? Wildlife experts and amateur bird watchers scoured Washington, D.C., hoping to spot the now famous bird. National Park Service employees reported an increase in visitors to parks around the Capitol, many carrying binoculars and cameras. "I've never seen so many people excited about a crow," one park ranger commented. "Usually, people only get this worked up about eagles or rare migratory species." The scientific community was equally intrigued. The Smithsonian's Ornithology Department announced a non-invasive study to identify and observe the bird if possible. This presents a unique opportunity to study corvid behavior in an unprecedented context, their press release stated. As the day progressed, political analysts began incorporating the crow incident into their assessments of the inauguration and what it might mean for the administration. "Symbols matter in politics," noted a veteran political correspondent on PBS. "Throughout history, birds have represented freedom, communication, even divine approval in various cultures. Whatever one thinks of this administration, they've been handed a powerful symbol that transcends typical political divisions." Indeed, something unusual was happening in the national conversation. People who rarely agreed on anything politically found themselves united in fascination with Liberty the Crow. Comment sections that normally devolved into partisan bickering instead filled with shared wonder and theories about the bird. A popular late-night host captured this sentiment in his monologue. "For one brief moment, America wasn't divided into red and blue. We were all just watching a bird and a man having what looked like a mutual understanding. Maybe we should put more birds in politics." As evening approached, a new development captured public attention. A wildlife photographer who had been staking out trees near the National Mall claimed to have spotted an unusually large crow with distinctive markings that matched Liberty's appearance from the inauguration footage. It was perched in an oak tree, watching people, the photographer told a local news station, sharing slightly blurry images that nonetheless created new excitement. "When it noticed me photographing it, it gave what seemed like a knowing look before flying off toward the White House." Experts who viewed the photos couldn't confirm with certainty that this was the same bird, but noted that American crows do have subtle individual markings that can distinguish them from one another. "If this is indeed the same crow," commented Dr. Reynolds in a follow-up interview, "it suggests the bird remains in the area, which isn't surprising as crows are territorial. What would be truly remarkable is if it makes another appearance at an official event." This speculation prompted increased security measures around upcoming presidential appearances. Secret Service officials who normally focused on human threats found themselves in the unusual position of developing protocols for a potential avian visitor. "We're not treating it as a security risk," a spokesperson clarified when questioned by reporters, "but we are prepared for the possibility of its return and the public reaction that would follow." Inside the White House, staffers noticed the president taking an unusual interest in the story. He requested articles about crows be included in his daily briefing materials and was observed watching news segments about Liberty with particular attention. "He's always had good instincts for what captures public imagination," a senior advisor commented privately to a colleague. "And this bird story is certainly doing that." By the evening of the second day, Liberty merchandise had appeared online. T-shirts, mugs, and even plush toys featuring stylized crows wearing miniature presidential seals were selling rapidly. Street vendors in D.C. quickly added crow-themed souvenirs to their usual offerings of American flags and White House replicas. The phenomenon crossed international borders as well. Foreign news outlets reported on the unusual American happening with a mixture of amusement and analysis. "American politics takes unexpected turn as wild bird joins inauguration," read the headline in a British newspaper, while Japanese television featured animated recreations of the moment. As night fell on Washington, social media users began sharing a curious observation. Several people reported seeing a large crow perched in a tree visible from the White House, maintaining its vigil even after sunset. Urban wildlife experts noted this wasn't typical behavior, as crows usually return to communal roosts for the night. If it is Liberty, this behavior suggests an unusual attachment to the location, or possibly to the president himself, noted a zoologist consulted by the Washington Post. "We're in uncharted territory here, scientifically speaking." Religious leaders and spiritual commentators also began weighing in, offering interpretations based on various traditions. In many Native American traditions, crows represent wisdom and transformation, explained a Cherokee elder in an interview. They're seen as messengers between worlds. Others pointed to Norse mythology, where Odin's ravens brought him information from across the world, or to biblical references to ravens bringing provisions. The diversity of these interpretations only added to the public's fascination. The third day brought yet another surprising development. During a brief press interaction as he departed the White House for a meeting, a reporter asked President Trump if he had any updates about his crow. With a characteristic half-smile, the president replied, "Great bird. Tremendous bird. I hear it might be around somewhere. We'll see what happens." As if responding to these words, there was sudden movement from a nearby tree, and a large crow took flight. Secret Service agents tensed, but the bird merely circled overhead 3 times, the same pattern observed at the inauguration, before flying off toward the National Mall. Cameras captured the moment, and by lunchtime, video comparison experts were analyzing footage to determine if this was indeed Liberty. The consensus leaned toward yes, based on size, markings, and the distinctive flight pattern. "Lightning doesn't usually strike twice," commented a wildlife biologist on an afternoon news program, "yet here we have what appears to be the same crow, once again appearing specifically during a presidential appearance." The statistical probability of this being random chance is extremely low. As the first week of the new administration progressed, the Liberty phenomenon showed no signs of fading. Instead, it evolved. Birdwatching groups reported increased membership. Children's books about friendly crows were suddenly in high demand at libraries. Elementary school teachers incorporated the story into lessons about wildlife and civic engagement. For a nation often divided by politics, Liberty the crow had become an unexpected common ground, a mystery and marvel that people could discuss across political lines. Whether viewed as a scientific curiosity, a powerful symbol, or simply an entertaining distraction, the presidential crow had captured America's imagination. What no one could predict was how this unusual story would continue to unfold, or how the relationship between a president and an enigmatic bird would develop into something that would eventually transcend politics altogether. As one editorial put it, "In a world that often seems increasingly divided and digital, perhaps it took a wild creature, acting on instincts we barely understand, to remind us of our shared humanity and connection to the natural world around us." For the moment, Americans watched and waited, united in curiosity about when Liberty might appear next, and what it might mean when it did. The stage was set for the next chapter in this most unexpected of presidential stories. 3 weeks passed since the inauguration, and the Liberty phenomenon had begun to settle into a comfortable rhythm in the national conversation. The initial frenzy had given way to a steady hum of interest, with occasional updates whenever someone claimed to have spotted the famous crow in Washington, D.C. Wildlife photographers staked out positions near the White House and National Mall, hoping to capture definitive images of Liberty. Amateur birdwatchers joined them, creating an unusual scene of people with binoculars and long lens. Cameras pointed at trees rather than monuments. "It's turned into quite the community," said a retired postal worker who had been coming to the same bench every day for a week. "We're all united by this little mystery no matter who we voted for." On social media, a dedicated group called the Liberty Watchers had formed, sharing potential sightings and debating whether random crows in photos were actually the presidential bird. They developed an informal identification guide based on the distinctive markings visible in the inauguration footage, a slightly asymmetrical pattern on the right wing, and a small patch of feathers that reflected blue in certain light. The White House had moved on to the business of governing. Though reporters still occasionally slipped in a question about Liberty during press briefings, the standard response had become a good-natured acknowledgement, followed by a pivot to policy matters. Then came the Rose Garden incident. It was a crisp February morning, 3 weeks and 2 days after the inauguration. President Trump had scheduled a small gathering in the Rose Garden to honor a group of firefighters who had performed a dramatic rescue during a recent apartment building fire in Chicago. The event was intentionally intimate, just 20 firefighters and their families, a handful of officials, and a small press pool. White House staff had chosen the outdoor setting, because the weather forecast promised clear skies and unseasonably mild temperatures. As planned, the president emerged from the Oval Office at precisely 10:30 a.m. He walked to the podium set up among early blooming flowers, nodded to the assembled guests, and began his remarks. "Today we honor true American heroes," he began, his voice clear in the morning air. "Men and women who ran toward danger when others ran away." He was 4 minutes into his speech when a familiar movement caught the attention of everyone present. A large black bird had appeared in the sky above the rose garden, circling in what was now a recognizable pattern. The president, who had been warned that liberty might make another appearance, continued speaking without pause. But everyone could see his eyes tracking the bird's movement, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The press pool photographers immediately shifted their focus, cameras whirring as they captured images of the crow's descent. The firefighters, who had expected to be the center of attention, found themselves witnesses to a now famous phenomenon. With 3 perfect circles, Liberty descended and, just as before, landed gently on the president's right shoulder. This time, however, the president was prepared. Without missing a beat in his speech, he reached up with his left hand and offered the crow what appeared to be a small morsel of food. The bird accepted it delicately, then settled comfortably on his shoulder as if this was a long-established routine. The moment was electric. The firefighters broke into spontaneous applause, not for the speech but for the remarkable reunion playing out before them. White House photographers, positioned perfectly this time, captured crystal-clear images of Liberty's distinctive markings. "As I was saying," the president continued with a characteristic wink to the crowd, "these brave firefighters represent the best of America, and it seems our feathered friend agrees." This drew appreciative laughter from the gathering. The ceremony continued for another 15 minutes, with Liberty remaining perched on the president's shoulder throughout. When the formal remarks concluded, and the president moved to personally greet each firefighter, the crow stayed with him, occasionally shifting position but never flying away. Within minutes, news alerts lit up phones across America. "Breaking presidential crow returns in rows." "Garden ceremony," announced CNN. Social media erupted with fresh excitement as the first images began circulating online. What made this appearance even more significant was the quality of the photographs. Unlike the somewhat distant and chaotic images from the inauguration, these new pictures provided a perfect, detailed view of Liberty. The bird's distinctive wing pattern was clearly visible, confirming that this was indeed the same crow. By noon, ornithologists had what they needed for positive identification. Dr. Reynolds appeared on a hastily arranged news segment, examining the new photographs. "There's no doubt this is the same individual," she confirmed, pointing to specific feather patterns. "American crows do have unique markings, much like human fingerprints. These images clearly show the same asymmetrical pattern on the right wing that we observed in the inauguration footage." More surprising was the bird's behavior. "What we're seeing here is truly unprecedented," Dr. Reynolds continued. "Wild crows can recognize individual humans and may form loose associations with people who feed them regularly. But this level of comfort with a specific person in a high-stimulus environment suggests something beyond typical crow behavior." The scientific community was buzzing with theories. Some suggested the crow might have been raised in captivity and released, explaining its comfort around humans. Others proposed more elaborate hypotheses involving imprinting or unusual developmental factors. At the White House, the press secretary faced a barrage of questions during the afternoon briefing. "Was the president carrying food specifically for the crow?" asked one reporter. "The president often carries small snacks for himself," came the careful response. "He simply decided to share when the opportunity arose." "Is there a plan for if the bird returns again?" asked another. "The president has made it see." Within minutes of the president entering the rose garden for private moments away from the public eye. During these unscripted encounters, Liberty would often approach and perch nearby, sometimes on the back of a bench where the president sat. There appeared to be a genuine interaction between man and bird. The president would sometimes speak to Liberty, and the crow would tilt its head in what looked remarkably like attentiveness. "We have to be careful not to anthropomorphize," Dr. Chen cautioned when these observations became public. "But it's also important not to dismiss what we're seeing. Liberty is displaying behaviors that suggest recognition, memory, and what we might call social bonding, at a level rarely documented in wild birds. The scientific community was buzzing with theories. Some suggested that Liberty might have had previous positive interactions with humans that made this unusual relationship possible. Others proposed that the crow was displaying an extreme example of the intelligence and adaptability for which corvids were already known. A minority view, gaining traction in certain circles, suggested something more profound might be at work, that Liberty could represent an evolutionary leap in crow intelligence, a bird that had developed an unprecedented ability to navigate human social structures. The public, meanwhile, remained captivated by each new development. Liberty updates became a regular feature on news programs. Children's drawings of the presidential crow flooded the White House mailroom. Several elementary schools adopted crow mascots, and sales of plush crow toys reached holiday season levels. Tourism in Washington, D.C. experienced an unexpected boost, with visitors hoping to catch a glimpse of the famous bird. Tour guides added Liberty sighting spots to their routes, pointing out trees where the crow had been frequently observed. Then came the discovery that transformed the scientific investigation into something even more significant. It happened during a routine review of footage from one of the wildlife cameras. A researcher noticed Liberty flying an unusual pattern between trees, seeming to navigate an invisible obstacle course with remarkable precision. Further analysis revealed something extraordinary. The crow was consistently following the same complex path to reach certain destinations on the White House grounds, even when simpler routes were available. What we're seeing appears to be deliberate navigation of a memorized three-dimensional route, explained Dr. Chen in a hastily called press briefing. Liberty isn't just flying from point A to point B. The crow is following a specific path that weaves between trees, around buildings, and over specific landmarks. This behavior had profound implications. It suggested that Liberty possessed a mental map of the White House grounds far more sophisticated than anything previously documented in corvids. The crow wasn't just recognizing locations. It was creating and following precise aerial pathways between them. When this discovery became public, it created a new wave of fascination. The science of animal cognition suddenly became dinner-table conversation across America. Schools incorporated Liberty's story into lessons about animal intelligence. University departments saw increased applications for programs in wildlife biology and avian studies. President Trump, who had been briefed on these findings, made an unexpected announcement during a press conference on unrelated matters. "We're learning some amazing things from our friend Liberty," he said, in response to a reporter's question. "I've directed the Interior Department to establish a special research program on crow intelligence. America should lead the world in understanding these remarkable birds." This declaration, coming from a president not previously known for wildlife conservation initiatives, surprised many. Environmental organizations cautiously welcomed the announcement, while political analysts debated whether the Liberty effect might signal a broader shift in administration priorities. The research program moved forward quickly, with funding allocated for expanded studies not just of Liberty, but of crow populations across the country. Dr. Chen was appointed to lead the initiative, working with a team of experts from various universities and wildlife organizations. As the scientific investigation deepened, Liberty continued to make public appearances that captivated the nation. At a Veterans Day ceremony on the White House lawn, the crow performed what observers described as a flyover, circling 3 times above the gathering before perching in a nearby tree, timing the appearance perfectly with the conclusion of the national anthem. During a visit by the Canadian Prime Minister, Liberty made an appearance that international media deemed diplomatically perfect, landing briefly on a tree branch overlooking the welcome ceremony before flying off in what one wit described as a non-partisan manner. The crow's presence had become so accepted that White House event planners began leaving small spaces in the schedule labeled Liberty Moment, allowing time for potential appearances and the public reaction that inevitably followed. As summer approached, the research team made another significant discovery. Analysis of Liberty's movements revealed that the crow was not just recognizing individuals, but appeared to be tracking the president's schedule, often arriving at locations shortly before he was due to appear. We've documented over 30 instances where Liberty arrived at a location within 5 minutes of the president's appearance there, Dr. Chen reported. The statistical probability of this being coincidence is extremely low. This finding raised a fascinating question. How was Liberty predicting the president's movements? The crow couldn't read schedules or understand spoken itineraries, yet somehow it was anticipating presidential appearances with remarkable accuracy. The research team developed several hypotheses. Perhaps Liberty was recognizing patterns in staff movements that preceded presidential appearances. Or maybe the crow was picking up on subtle environmental cues, changes in security posture, preparation activities, even shifts in electronic equipment that might be detectable to a bird's sensory system. What we're seeing may be an extraordinary example of observational learning, suggested Dr. Chen. Liberty appears to have created mental associations between certain activities and the president's subsequent appearance. This explanation, while scientifically sound, didn't diminish the public's sense of wonder. If anything, it enhanced it. The idea that a wild bird could learn to navigate the complex rhythms of the White House and anticipate presidential movements spoke to a level of intelligence that resonated with people's intuitive sense that animals were more aware than humans often gave them credit for. As the research continued, a new pattern emerged in Liberty's behavior. The crow began bringing small objects to presidential appearances, a twig, a bright leaf, once even a small white feather. These items would be deposited nearby, often on the podium before speeches or on the path where the president would walk. Corvid. Experts recognize this as an extension of the gift-giving behavior occasionally observed in crows that had formed bonds with humans. Typically, such behavior was seen in birds that received regular feeding from specific people, but Liberty's gift-giving seemed more selective and context-specific. The objects appear to be carefully chosen, noted a researcher on Dr. Chen's team. They're often symmetrical or have unusual coloration. This suggests deliberate selection rather than random collection. This behavior added yet another dimension to the already remarkable story. Liberty wasn't just recognizing and following the president. The crow appeared to be engaging in a form of communication or exchange. When asked about these gifts during a brief press interaction, President Trump responded with uncharacteristic thoughtfulness. "I've saved every one of them," he admitted. "There's something special about receiving a gift from a wild creature. Makes you think about our connection to the natural world." This sentiment, coming from a leader not previously known for environmental advocacy, struck many as significant. Environmental organizations noted a subtle shift in administrative policies, with more attention being paid to wildlife conservation issues and habitat protection. Whether directly related to the Liberty phenomenon or not, commented the director of a national conservation group, "We're seeing more openness to environmental concerns from this administration than we had anticipated." By midsummer, the research project had expanded to include genetic analysis. With extraordinary care and respect for the bird's wildness, researchers managed to collect several feathers Liberty had naturally shed. These were sent to a specialized laboratory for DNA analysis. The results, when they came back, added yet another layer to the unfolding story. Liberty's genetic profile showed something unexpected, markers that differentiated this crow from typical American crows, though not enough to classify it as a different species. "What we're seeing might be described as a genetic variant," explained a geneticist working with Dr. Chen's team. Liberty appears to have several genetic markers associated with enhanced cognitive function in corvids. These variations are rare but not unprecedented. In essence, Liberty might represent something of a genetic outlier, a crow with neural architecture that pushed the boundaries of typical corvid intelligence. This finding didn't fully explain the bird's extraordinary behavior, but it provided a potential biological foundation for it.